This is where you primarily work?
The barn. This is it. What I like most about this particular setup is that I can't forget to hit the record button.
Yeah.
I had like a solutions architect who also worked on the show Mr. Robot as an advisor.
Yeah. Wait, who?
James Pluff.
Well, Mr. Robot's a tough act to follow. It's one of my favorite shows right now. Speaking of gamification, there's a whole alternate reality game laid on top of the show.
Oh, yeah. Welcome to Device Squad, the podcast for the mobile enterprise from Propelics. Device Squad, fighting crimes against enterprise mobility worldwide. Bad UI, frustrating user experiences, poorly conceived mobile strategies, we defeat them all. This podcast series will cover all aspects of enterprise mobility, including strategy, development, design, testing, and more. My name is Steve Brickman. I'm a mobile strategist and UX architect with Propelics. First, a brief history of the company. Founded in 2011, Propelics is a mobile strategy consultancy helping enterprises worldwide devise true mobile strategies and develop world-class mobile applications across all industry verticals. Propelics clients include large companies like Amway, Bright Horizons, Bank of Montreal, Dubai Airports, Family Dollar, DLL, Cintas, Merck, and many more. Propelics' menu of services includes 8 different mobile kickstarts covering everything from mobile strategy and road mapping to MCOE to UI UX design to mobile testing strategy, along with soup to nuts app design development and support. Additionally, Propelics offers 3 homegrown enterprise mobile products. I am here with Nick Bogovich, another genius MIT grad and gaming expert. And today we are going to talk about gamification in the enterprise and in general, and video games in general, and how they can evolve us as a species.
Sounds good to me.
That's what I've been hearing.
Yeah. When I was younger, I kept on telling my mom that video games serve a purpose and attribute my having no car accidents to having quick reflexes that I gained in playing all sorts of Nintendo and arcade games when I was a child.
That's pretty good. I had nothing but car accidents throughout my life. Yeah. And I think that's what that is. So first of all, why don't you just start off by giving us a little bit about your journey in technology.
Sure.
And how you got to where you are.
So what brought me here and into the Boston area was MIT. At a very early age, actually one of my first memories ever was playing an Atari 2600 in my basement and experiencing score rollover at the early age of 3 or maybe 3.5 in Space Invaders, and starting to cry because my score went from 9,999 down to 0.
That's hurtful.
Yeah, yelling out to my mom, like, where'd my score go?
That's it. They couldn't code anything higher.
Yeah, that was the limitation of the system, or at least that game. And anyways, I've always played games throughout my life. You know, when you're in the classroom at an early age, people are like, I want to be a fireman, I want to be a doctor. One of my dream jobs was to be a Nintendo game counselor, to dispense advice to young kids who were seeking it within Legend of Zelda or what have you. So I was always interested in games, interested in technology. Attended MIT, got an electrical engineering and computer science degree. After college, started working for an internet consulting firm during the dot-com boom. And it wasn't until about 5 years after college that I started my own company that did mobile marketing, primarily text message and ringtone campaigns when those were a thing. And then about 6 years after doing that.
What was that?
That was mStyle. Yeah, the M is from mobile. That was in the era of Jamster. And
oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was an interesting time. Yeah, those were the years of mobile, and we're still in the years of mobile every year. Whether you go to CTIA or Mobile World Congress, you know, this year is going to be the year of mobile. But I think mobile's here for sure. Yeah,
becoming a thing now. It's huge.
It's been a thing long enough where old fads are coming back, right? So Motorola has reintroduced the Razr and Nokia and their candy bar phone.
BlackBerry not so much.
Yeah, BlackBerry I think is probably done. But Yeah, I'd say it wasn't until 5-6 years after running my own company that I had an opportunity to work at the Game Show Network, who had yet to really launch into mobile. They knew the mobile space was going to be a huge one for casual games, and I had an opportunity to work there and help them launch some good titles. So I had an opportunity to head up their mobile group for a few years, and during my time there launched a game called GSN Casino, which over the past few years has been one of the top 10, top 25 grossing on iOS and Google Play. Since then, I've been consulting for the last couple of years in the mobile space, specifically mobile gaming.
Cool. I remember my first game experience was at my Uncle Joel's house. So I remember being in his basement. I think I'm a decade older than you are.
Yeah.
So it was Pong, but I don't even think it was like the Pong version of Pong. I think it was like Sears Tele Arcade or something. Yeah. And we had the paddles. I don't know why they called them paddles, because they were like, it was a knob right. that you would turn.
Yeah.
And we played it for like hours.
Yeah.
Because...
Well, I mean, at the time, I mean, it was so novel, and the fact that you could be playing this right on this device in your home at the time was certainly groundbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, it was the first time you ever got to like interact with your television. So anything was exciting. Like,
right.
Oh my God, I turned this knob and a rectangle goes
moves up and down. Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah. But it just shows how, as a species, how simple things can be to create joy or excitement, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, things get more and more complex these days, specifically within gaming, but the core experience doesn't need to be that crazy to get joy out of it, right?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, especially, when we get more into the idea of motivation at work through gamification, that maybe it doesn't really take very much at all to achieve that. So, yeah, and it wasn't in color. It was one color. It was like gray, I think, or green. So then after that, it was the Coleco Telstar Arcade, which was that triangular game that was similar. It was more variations of a square moving around on the screen, but this time you could actually shoot them with a gun,
right? Which
was just incredible for a 6-year-old boy. So you've been at this since you were like literally a toddler.
Yeah, I've been playing games ever since I can remember. My brother and sister are 16 and 13 years older than me, respectively. So when I was born, we had an Atari 2600. One of the first things I remember, I had a nice library that I just came into. And all my cousins that were older than me, I used to infuriate because for whatever reason, playing those games came very naturally to me. They'd be 13, 15 years old, and here I am, 3 or 4-year-old Nick. And I'm just destroying them in like every game. And
how do you account for that? Do you think it's like a better mastery of timing?
Probably.
Do you play music?
I do. I mean, but not in a band or anything. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's a certain sense of rhythm or hand-eye coordination that's required.
These games seem so simplistic, but Gus, he's into Minecraft now.
Yeah.
And as complex as that is, he got one of these little $10 emulators, and he loves it. And he'll sit there at his desk playing this little tiny Space Invaders with the tiny joystick.
Yeah.
So it's amazing that those games are still captivating, even though obviously so rudimentary when you consider the 3D environment that he could be enjoying.
Right.
It's fine.
It's funny, the older I get, obviously there's been incredible advances in technology in general, right? So games we play today, the environments look so real, and obviously with virtual reality coming into play and everything, you're able to literally immerse yourself directly in those worlds. But it doesn't require that level of detail to have fun, right? At the end of the day, when thinking about what makes games fun, the idea just has to be fun. The execution has to be fun. The detail, adds a nice layer to things. It makes it feel that much better. But I think you could have the best looking game out there, but if it's not fun, people won't play it after time.
So let's just back up and let's just define what gamification is for people who don't know. So the definition I have, and add to this if you want. Gamification is a process of using game thinking and mechanics to engage users. This concept can be applied to both customer-facing applications and employee-facing applications in a company's business model. So it's really just the idea of turning day-to-day enterprise tasks or other tasks into games and applying game elements to those tasks. Can you talk to what some of those gaming elements would include?
Just before I jump into that, I think of gamification similar to how I think of personification, which is really, with personification, you're taking human elements and applying them to things that aren't people, right? And so with games, it's the same thing. You're taking components that you'd normally find within games and applying them to things that aren't games. So I'd say one of the earliest examples that all of us probably have experienced, whether we remember it or not, is gamification around eating your vegetables as a baby, right? So it's the parent taking a spoon full of yucky food, but flying it around like an airplane and making that fun. And then all of a sudden your kid's eating vegetables because you made it fun. It's making something that isn't a game into a game. And
then applying a reward.
And having a reward, right? And so at least at that early age, the reward could be multiple things. It could be, obviously finishing your food, getting dessert. It could be just seeing the happiness or the reaction that your parents get when you actually, take the food and they're like, hey.
Or you get the status reward of being the clean plate ranger.
Right. Yeah.
That was one.
That's it. Yeah.
Or the clean the plate club.
So that the
exclusivity.
Badges or achievements, right? So there's all sorts of different components that you can extract from games and layer them into things that are otherwise mundane to make them fun. And I think when thinking about it from a business perspective, it's not that everything should be gamified. What you need to be asking yourself is, what is the end result that you desire? If it's a mundane task, where's the drop off? What are you trying to get people to do? And how can you incorporate elements of games to get a behavior or get a completion of a task? We were joking before about I was going to buy an Amazon gift card, and let's see if that code came through. Here we go. Yeah. So to apply gamification to this very podcast, I had the idea that to entice people to listen all the way through, I would buy a $5 Amazon gift card and read out bits of the claim code throughout the podcast. And as a reward for listening to the podcast and not just putting it on in the background, but actually paying attention as well throughout, every few minutes I'd read part of the claim code, and whoever's the first to piece the claim code together gets a $5 Amazon gift card. So the first part of the claim code is AL7J. So A is in alpha, L is in lambda. I don't know. Is that the L, Leonard? I don't know. Lambda. 7J is in Joseph. I used to know all the
codes. I always wondered why the numbers don't need
Charlie.
A code.
Yeah, I don't know.
How come numbers you could just say the number and 7. It's fine, but letters you gotta put a word there.
Right.
With it. I never got that.
But anyway, so gamification is taking those components of games and making mundane things enjoyable or rewarding or influencing user behavior.
That's great. So I have a quote. The benefits of gaming. Gaming is productive. It produces positive emotion, stronger social relationships, a sense of accomplishment, and for players who are part of a game community, a chance to build a sense of purpose. I found this TED Talk, and it's not a new TED Talk. It's actually like 7 years old. But I thought it was pretty relevant, and it's kind of interesting in a way that I'm kind of thankful that it's old, because now we can look back on it and see
if they're right.
See if she's right. So it's the video is Gaming Can Make a Better World by Jane McGonigal. She talks a lot about World of Warcraft, and her whole deal is that if we could take the power of gaming and instead of just having it be games where you're just shooting imaginary things and so forth, if we could apply that to real problems in the real world. So she's almost like sort of predicting this idea of gamifying
life,
general tasks in life and things like that. So yeah, I think she kind of gets it wrong at the end when she actually produces some of these games, but we'll get to that in a second. So first of all, she talks about all the things that gaming provides that the real world does not. You've touched on that a little bit, but let's just formalize that a little bit more. Specifically, what are these things? The benefits that you get out of gaming that the real world is simply unable to
do. I mean, there's a few things. A sense of achievement, obviously, is one thing that you see time and time again. So going back to the early arcade days, the sense of achievement you would get is entering your initials and having those be at the top of the leaderboard, right? So leaderboards was obviously instilled very early on in gaming culture and always has, right? Even with things like chess, you have your chess score, your grandmaster ranking, and you know, these concepts certainly go many centuries ago. But, you know, with arcades, it started with leaderboards. With Atari 2600, I know that if you achieved a certain score, so not being necessarily at the top of the leaderboards, but achieving a certain score threshold, you could take a picture of that, send it into Activision, and they would send you literally, it was a badge that you could...
like on badge?
Yeah, on badge. I wish I did this more often because now, in hindsight, it's a really cool... memento to have from that era. But you could go probably on eBay and just search Activision game badges, and you take a picture of the screen, send it in, and there's one game I really loved, Kaboom, where you had to catch these bombs in buckets to defuse them. I remember that was one that I sent in, and literally the turnaround for that badge was probably a month or two. Whereas now, obviously, it's much more instantaneous, but the concept still certainly holds. Then there's rewards, or doing something long enough where, having shown that repeated behavior, you could take that currency you've aggregated and trade it in for something. You see that a lot, obviously, in rewards programs, right? Spend with your American Express, earn these points, redeem the points for exclusive opportunities to concert tickets, or obviously more savings on your credit card.
That stuff is so omnipresent now. I don't even think about that as a form of gamification, but of course it is.
You bring up a good point. There's so much of this around us, right? How do you start to redefine or have your gamification stand out versus the competition? Because gamification is really layered into many things that we do, just we're used to it now. So it's a matter of taking that to the next level. When I think, too, about gamification, really, at its core, where it's really successful or where it can really take off is you have to find the right application, right? So think about Pokemon Go. The game itself is new in the sense that it had Pokemon, but it's just a reinvented version of this game called Ingress.
Really?
But it's Ingress with Pokemon.
Yeah.
I have some friends who have played Ingress and were really hardcore players into it. But then the company who makes Ingress also was a developer behind Pokemon Go as well, Niantic Labs. They just partnered with Nintendo and the Pokemon company to get rights to the Pokemon IP.
Man.
But if you think about Pokemon Go, right, you could say, it's a Pokemon game, or you could look at it as, it's actually a really intelligent exercise, sort of like step tracking utility. And so all of a sudden, you saw reports like within weeks after Pokemon Go coming out that people had lost like 20 or 30 pounds in the course of a couple months of playing just because they were walking so much.
Right.
And so obviously that's like a very extreme version of gamification. But even, look at Fitbit and just now the concept of recording all your steps, and now you're at 9,000 steps, but hey, get to 10,000 and just have that intrinsic sort of motivation to get your steps in every day. Now the ability to have access to this data that we otherwise didn't have access to just because things like the Apple Watch or Fitbit weren't around 5-10 years ago. And now you're starting to see health benefits, gamification layered into health experiences. With enterprise types of things or business applications, in order for gamification to be really successful, you want the components of games to be layered in a way that supports the business need. This area I feel like has really evolved over like the past 5 or 10 years within mobile, within the advent of the App Store and the Google Play Store. We've seen the mobile industry, or just really software in general, evolve from a pay first and then use it model to now there's a lot of freemium type of applications out there. And that concept isn't really new. It's an extension or an evolution of the shareware from the 80s and 90s, right? Where I remember a friend of mine giving me a copy of Wolfenstein 3D, for a Intel 286 or 386 computer I had. And I'm like, wait, you're just giving me this game? He's like, no, it's, the first level. If you like it, you could pay the developer and get the full game. And that was really freemium realized 20 years ago, 30 years ago, where you're giving away part of your product for free, get people hooked on it. and then, hopefully they'll pay for the rest of it. And so games and even just applications in general today use a lot of the freemium model where they give away enough of their experience or their application to whet your appetite. And then you hopefully get hooked enough to the extent that you'll say, look, I appreciate this. I'll pay you for your work. I'll continue to use your product.
We've built a couple of knowledge retention apps for clients, for their employees, for like employee training.
Yep.
That gamify this training process. They're pretty simple in what they do. It's basically you're taking a quiz and then you get points. There's a timer. There's a leaderboard. So there's the competitive aspect to it. You can see, which of your coworkers are up there.
Yep.
And there were benefits too, like there were actual real world prizes that you win, gift cards and so forth. And then there was also badges. So, if you get like 20 in a row correct, you get a badge. If you get 20 in a row correct in a certain period of time, there's another badge. And so there was a series of, like 20 or 30 different badge levels. But obviously there's a lot more that can be done to gamify than just providing that. I feel like instant gratification has so much to do with it. And this Jane McGonigal talks about this too, how in a video game, you do the right thing and you instantly see the points that you receive for blowing up something or whatever. That doesn't happen in the real world when you're working in a warehouse and you found the right box and you put it in the cart. You don't see how many points you get, but you could.
You could.
And we'll get to that. So one of the other things that McGonigal mentions as being so satisfying to the gaming experience is the epic win.
Yep.
That's a real term. Like when she said it,
some people use it. Maybe
is that still around?
I don't know.
That was from 2010. People were talking about epic. I mean, it's kind of hokey.
What the kids are saying these days.
Yeah, but whether or not that's an actual term that's being used, the idea of epic meaning, I think, is important. That a game somehow just amps up the meaning of everything.
Oh yeah. Well, so the other word, epic is one of the words. The other word is win. We grow up in a environment where I don't want to say necessarily winning is everything, but there's a satisfaction that you get from winning. There's a concept around leaderboards that like everyone can be at the top of their own leaderboard. It's just what are the criteria involved so that leaderboard. What are the data points that make you the leader on your own leaderboard. I think as it pertains to gamification, you want to strive for that, but as a whole, thinking about what McGonigal is probably talking about in her TED Talk around the concept of the epic win. Generally speaking, people love to win, the sense of competition, even if it's against yourself. You love to win. You love to see progress. The fact that you spend time repeating this task, you want to feel like you're getting better. And that's another thing with gamification is, especially in a corporate or an enterprise environment, attaching the sense of progress to something that you just feel is mundane and you don't really have a desire to repeat, but you'll go through it to see if there's that level of self-improvement.
Yeah.
There's one app that certainly comes to mind when I think about self-improvement, and it's a health-related one called Strava. So Strava is an app that allows you to record your performance, whether you're running or biking. And two of the things I think it does really well is around how it records your data and uses that data from previous sessions and kind of plays it back to you in real time for your next session. So let's say I go around and do a 20-mile bike ride. I always loved growing up watching the Olympics and watching the bobsledders or the lugers or skiers, right? You see the time, the person who was in first place did this segment within a minute, and then, they're 5 seconds behind the leader. Whatever it is.
Like their track.
You show their track versus the previous.
Behind
So there's two things. One is the segmentation of that data. So I could be going up Johnson Road in Winchester, which has a pretty steep hill. And the first time I did it, I was just completely winded and I felt incredibly weak and felt like a failure in many regards. But I made it up and recorded my time, and I look back at it now and it's pathetic. But the next time I went up, I saw my time right there. And that little bit of motivation I needed to say, okay, I can beat this time from my previous session. And then actually what they do is also they use the concept of a ghost rider, right? So thinking about Super Mario Kart, for example, was one of the first games I remember where you could complete a course and then you could see a ghosted version of yourself ahead of you and try to race against yourself. And so even on my bike rides now, I can see my time as a whole, segment, yes, but also as a whole to see, okay, now I'm 2 minutes ahead of where I was last time and I feel good about it. And that sets a new benchmark for me for the next time that I ride. And the goal is obviously continuing to improve. I could see one application probably in 5 years from now is with the advent of technologies like, Google Glass, I think, was a little bit early, but Microsoft's HoloLens and using augmented reality. I could see a future where in 5 years, I will literally see a ghosted version of myself projected onto my glasses in front of me, and that will be a visual representation of that ghost, right? That'll give me even more incentive to try to catch up.
That is amazing, because talking about when you're in a video game, just to backtrack a little bit first to the idea of the epic experience. Video games are exciting. You've got a soundtrack, and life is not so exciting. There's not a soundtrack, but there could be.
There could be.
Right? So that's kind of the same thing. The music could be programmed in just the same way it is in a video game.
Yep.
This idea of being in an epic environment, and then this idea of being able to go against yourself. So you take a mundane task. For frame of reference, let's just keep using this idea of a guy who's in a warehouse who loads things on a cart.
Yeah.
So now, you go from this being a mundane task to now I get that instant response of seeing how long it took last time. How can I beat it? Right. And then you get to see yourself doing that, and then you beat it, and there's that gratification, and then you get some kind of a reward, like a badge or points. But there's that instant gratification that comes from that.
Yeah.
It's not a kitschy idea that we're just giving out badges or we have a leaderboard and stuff like that. You really can very accurately recreate the entire gaming experience.
Oh, yeah. You can absolutely take components of games, layer them into, again, otherwise mundane, very standard tasks. But using those components of whether it's showing progress over time or offering rewards, all of those things can be ways to motivate people to either complete their tasks or perform their tasks better. And those concepts aren't new. You just need to make sure that you're layering them in a way that is not forced, right? It's got to feel natural to the experience.
Either that or all of this is for naught, because all these jobs will be taken over by robots.
Yeah.
And they won't care about gaming.
No.
But then the other thing, when you think about it, totally makes sense, because how mundane is Pong as a task?
Yeah.
You're just turning a knob back and forth to hit a green square.
Even games are getting gamified with esports becoming more of a thing, right? So it's not just, hey, get your name at the top of the leaderboards, but if you're at the top of the leaderboards, our sponsors will pay you thousands of dollars for that performance. And even... Right, sports, sports are games, yes. I think the reason why people play sports at an early age is for a love of the game. They love the competition. That core loop, whatever it is you're doing, is something that is so enjoyable that you're willing to do it over and over and over again. I love baseball because I played baseball, I watched baseball. There's something about the game of baseball and its nuances that appeal to me. I never made it to the major leagues, but there are 1,000 people out there who get paid incredibly well to go play the game of baseball. And there's a whole business layered around it. And businesses will change the way that games evolve. Or vice versa, right? Yeah, games can change the way businesses evolve. And so, as long as it's done in a way that is natural to your initial sort of core value proposition, I think it's good. Just one thing about the way the mobile space has evolved over the past few years. So I was touching upon shareware was a really early predecessor of the freemium model, right? Give away your app for free, have enough hooks in the app so that people see the core value proposition of what it is you're offering, to the extent that when you say, hey, if you'd like to continue doing this, pay us some money. That whole evolution of freemium, I think, has really changed the way people perceive mobile apps or mobile games from a business perspective, because now it's all about data, and the data shows, okay, well, if we get someone to this part of a user experience, they're 60% likely to do this, or they're 60% likely to pay.
Yeah.
So, okay, what can we do early on in our user experience to influence that behavior to the extent that you're improving your numbers overall? How has mobile changed the way experiences are gamified? Right now, because companies are trying to build businesses around apps or these services, everything's backed up by the numbers. So if you think about, okay, let's take Strava for an example. Strava is the biking and running application, right? Yeah. So you can pay $5 a month or $10 a month, whatever it is. They have some set of numbers. So Strava, they get paid on a recurring basis. Some number of their users will pay per month some amount. It all backs out from their numbers. So if they know, okay, 10% of our users pay on a monthly basis, what can we do to influence people to pay? And then they start looking backwards at, okay, well, what are the things that people have to do? Maybe it's, people who use the app 5 times and record 5 biking sessions, are 80% more likely to pay than someone else. And so the whole initial user experience, the first time user experience, is crafted towards how can we get those 5 sessions recorded so that we're in a much better position to monetize on this user than we were before. Going back about 10 years to my mStyle days, one of our clients was the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. They had data that suggested that when people visited the museum at least 3 times, the likelihood of them becoming a lifetime member was like 10x people who visited 1 or 2 times. And so for them, they saw their subscriber base getting older and older. They didn't have a new set of younger constituents coming in. And so they were trying to find creative ways to appeal to a younger audience. And one of the ways they were doing that was through text messaging campaigns and downloading wallpaper versions of their artwork for your phone and trying to appeal to a younger demographic on their phones. And so they had all sorts of different calls to actions on billboards and posters throughout the city of Boston to get this artwork. They had all sorts of events to get people into the museum because they knew, okay, if we can get these kids in 2 or 3 times, they'll become a member. Yeah. And then if they become a member, then they just have to visit once a year and they'll become repeat members. And so they were trying to, it was all about the data and how can we apply the data in a way to real applications and then crafting a user experience to influence the application.
That's another connection that we have because Reagan and I at Aperion, we built the prototype for the MFA Guide was the name of the app, but it was a tour guide app.
Yeah.
This was just the prototype.
That's the replacement for like the headset version. Yeah, I mean,
and that was to appeal to a younger audience. And
yeah. So that's looking at mobile and gamification from a pure business perspective, right? And I'd say, for all the enterprise-related folks who are listening in, and we'll be reading another bit of the Amazon gift card claim code shortly, but start with the business need first. With the MFA, using them as an example, it was about, okay, our average constituent is getting older and older each year. How can we make that younger? Because eventually those people are going to die and they're not going to have any revenue coming in. And so that's a real business problem. And then they looked at the data and said, okay, how can we create user experiences that are geared towards younger audiences to get them engaged so that they can show the behavior that we know will result in monetization. And so when I think about enterprise, there's a couple different ways to get users hooked, or rather there's a couple different ways to view it from a business perspective. One is, businesses probably monetize based on the number of users that are using it, or maybe it's an extension of the business value that you're providing to your client. You can directly show the impact of gamification to clients who monetize based on their application. The fact that, okay, like Strava, for example, they know a certain subset of their audience monetizes after X number of sessions, and they know what their revenue expectations are for that percentage of their audience that subscribes. For clients who are offering their apps as an extension to the services or value that they provide, you still want gamification. Just it's harder, I think, to quantify the effects of gamification because you don't see it directly related to the numbers of the experience you're enhancing with gamification. You're going to see it in the numbers of, okay, well, how many new bids are we winning? How many clients are staying with us and doing repeat business? So like the way that you quantify the numbers and show the success of gamification is going to be a little bit different for those types of clients, I think.
So just to get back to these sort of 4 tenets of what gamification provides, just from a purely experiential point of view. We just talked about the epic win, which of course doesn't happen in real life, unless you're like Louis C.K. or something. Or Donald Trump, I guess that would be a good example.
Yes.
He sort of seemed to have gamified the entire system, really. Then the other thing she talks about is this idea of urgent optimism that comes with gameplay. So her point is that a gamer knows that no matter how hard a game seems, there's always a way to win.
There's always a chance.
That's within reach.
Yep.
They sort of trust in the benevolence of the game creators, that there's always going to be a way out, that it's not going to be beyond their grasp. And as a result, you get this urgent optimism, and she shows somebody in the throes of urgent optimism. You and I are both talking about different aspects of gamification right now. You're talking about sort of monetization, gamification to make money, and I'm talking more about gamification to improve task completion. The idea of blissful productivity is another thing, that gamers will just spend hours in this blissfully productive trance. Whether or not they're accomplishing anything real, they're blissful about what they're doing. So again, another way of improving the mindset of your employee base by enabling them to feel productive in a more epic sense. And then the last thing that she talks about was this idea of improved social fabric, that players who play together are more socially connected in a more meaningful way, that they learn to solve problems together more so than you would in everyday life. They're all working together to solve these problems that there's like immediate need versus maybe longer term needs in the real world. And that creates tighter bonds. So another benefit there.
I buy into that. Thinking about sports, there's a lot of games out there where team play is incredibly important. Basketball, baseball, what have you. The fact you're all working towards a common goal of winning the game as a unit. Performing together, winning as a unit requires strong relationships. And any team that gets assembled over time, that team will perform better because it knows how to play with each other and work together towards that common goal. So in the workplace, similarly, you can use games as a way to create bonds among your employees, among your team members, that transcend the game itself. Because then you start to see those relationships carry on beyond the game. And so, I do buy into, maybe not with the Halos or, Calls of Duty games out there, but in terms of creating a stronger social fabric.
Crazy Taxi.
Yeah, Crazy Taxi. I love Crazy Taxi. But I do think that games in general, working together to complete tasks, can create those bonds.
One other thing I found was this idea of flow. How do you feel about this? Flow is described as a spontaneous joy while performing a task. Certainly, sometimes when I'm drumming, I experience flow where it's sort of a thoughtless behavior. Basketball players, you hear about it a lot. They get in the zone.
Feel the flow,
It's described as being a gateway to happiness. Also, in terms of video game play,
it's a level of concentration that I think can be achieved after either a certain amount of time or practice, right? So within the context of basketball, you definitely see players go on streaks where it doesn't matter where they are, just mentally they're at the state where they have a confidence where they'll hit any shot no matter where they are on the court or no matter whose hand is in their face. It doesn't matter. They're just at that level, and you can't sustain it for all time. It comes and goes. And I think with drumming or music too, I mean, you could probably see the same band, if it's a jam band or somebody, like you could see them perform the same song night after night, but there might be just something about a particular night, whether it's the weather or the environment or the crowd just cheering at the right time. you can tell that a band might be feeding off each other in a different way. It does represent the concept of flow. In games too, there's flows to them. There are times where you're just going to perform much better than you would at other moments.
That's an interesting idea, like the band thing, that if there's a group task that involves separate performers performing all at the same time, that you can actually enhance that experience by gamifying it and creating that flow.
I mean, there are components of gamification layered into that. It's the crowd screaming louder, right? And just you're feeding off of that energy. And similarly, I think in a workplace environment, the ability to complete a task so well that you're all collectively getting this sense of achievement by doing it in unison or working in tandem, a team can feel a flow similarly. And I think there are ways to communicate to your team that whatever it is they're doing is remarkable and you can show them some sort of achievement or something like that. I know it's kind of vague how we're talking about it, but I do think that there's credence to the concept of flow. And I think too, with urgent optimism, I'd say I've spent 5 of the last 7 years of my life making casino games for mobile devices. And if you just take the concept of a casino, I think that's a perfect environment that shows urgent optimism. You walk into a casino, you're seeing bells and lights go off all around you, and you feel optimistic, like, hey, that could be me.
Yeah,
and
especially
then all of a sudden,
depending on how many free Bloody Marys you've had.
Right, exactly, yeah. And there's a sense of urgency, whether it's imposed by a jackpot that's, someone's going to win this jackpot at some point.
Yeah.
Why can't it be me? And why can't it be me? Because everyone else around me's got their machines going off like crazy.
You hear people winning and you see people winning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other sense of urgency is around, I only have limited funds, and so I got to do this, within the $100 or $200 that I have, or else my chance is going to go away. So there's all different ways you can impose urgency on an environment. Games can improve the social aspect within your company, I think. Time limits too, right? Like if you think about, okay, this task needs to be done by this time. Can you do it? And you're like, yeah, I can do it. But there's still that sense of urgency around whether or not you can. And, can you do it in a way that's of high quality? Because maybe you can complete the task, but, in the warehouse, right? You might move the pallet from one place to another, but you knocked over 20 pallets in the process, and that wasn't that great.
This is a good lead into, this is again from 2010, which is very early on in the smartphone world. The iPhone came out in 2009?
9 or 2008.
So still, we were sort of naive. So Jane had this idea that she would gamify problems in the real world, but I think her approach was sort of misguided because obviously she couldn't predict some of the AR, VR technology that we have now. So what she did is she created these desktop games where the goal of the game is like save fuel or consume less water, things like that. And then you would get points and so forth by saving gasoline, saving fuel. And you would compete against other people and so forth. But it was still like a simulation of a real world problem. It wasn't actually engaging in the real world, which is now completely possible. With AR, you can totally just apply a game layer onto the mundane tasks for real.
Yeah.
So you can make these tasks more engaging visually. You can make them sound better by applying a soundtrack that's timed to task completion and so forth, just like in a video game.
Yep.
You can display points and things like that in real time with arrows and so forth that are pointing to the thing that got them the points, just like in like Super Mario Brothers, jumping up and hitting a block with your head and then you see things come out of it.
Yep.
You can see past performance graphically represented, your own past performance, and you can try to beat that. And you can also see like performance of others represented graphically.
Yep.
And so the controllers, in air quotes, the game controller becomes the actual task itself. The thing that you have to do, the box that you have to move.
Well, I almost feel like
what it is.
you become the controller, and the data points that you're talking about is the the display, right, or your score. One of the big areas we'll probably see this kind of come into the real world is, at least right now, I think that the biggest application is in health-related tasks, right? So calorie consumption or number of steps that you take, or, what's your weight today? And if I go and take 10, 15,000 steps a day, all of a sudden my weight is decreasing and I feel better and I'm more productive. And so I think one layer of this where we're seeing the improvements is the fact that we're just recording this data now. And then I think the second thing will be just how can we effectively communicate that data in a way that gets you to do something. On my Apple Watch, I have it set up that every hour I'll stand. At 50 minutes on the hour, I'll get a notification saying,
stand up.
Yes, you haven't stood up yet.
Yeah.
And so it's a good way for me to stretch. And I know that there's all sorts of benefits around just making sure that the blood flow going through my body is good for me and it keeps me from sitting down for too long. That's just one very simple way where I have this little notification like, hey, you can do it. You can stand up. And I'm like, hey, I did it. And there's that sense of achievement when I get the notification saying, hey, you stood for a minute. And that's such a stupid example, but it's a very real example of how gamification's layered into our daily lives. The more important one is I have it set up so that I have 800 active calories per day. So whether it's walking or going to the gym and trying to do the elliptical or the treadmill for a little bit, I try to get that exercise in just because I know I feel better generally speaking. And the fact that it's measured really helps. And the fact that I can get an achievement if I exercise every day in a week and I get that badge, that's all intrinsic motivation. There's nobody here saying like, you must run every day, but that's all internalized. But I think in a workplace environment, again, it's all about the rewards. Why do you care about somebody completing a task? What benefit from a business perspective does that have? Are you able to serve more clients? Is there better throughput? Are your employees happier by completing these tasks? And therefore, when they're happier, they're more likely to achieve the flow, right? So you have to be asking yourself those types of questions. What is it that we're trying to improve upon? How can we put these markers or capture data and tie the whole thing together in an experience that results in a positive effect for your business? The general concepts of gamification can be very powerful. You just need to be asking yourself at the business level, what are we trying to achieve? And then knowing that, how can you layer in the components of gamification to help you achieve those things? So going back to your point earlier about how I was talking about gamification more from a business perspective and you're talking about it more from an application perspective, I almost think that's the same thing.
Yeah.
In the sense that you want to be successful as a business. I tend to look at things from the numbers and work backwards from there as to, okay, how can I craft an application to support these numbers? The Museum of Fine Arts example being a perfect representation of that from a business perspective, they knew that they needed to attract a younger audience. And then it starts to come into play. Okay, well, what are the experiences that can attract a younger audience? You brought up the example of the tour guide replacing the headsets, doing that all through your mobile device. At mStyle, I was working with their text-based campaigns and downloading wallpapers of famous art to their phone. Both different applications entirely, but both supporting a common goal of appealing to a younger audience. Before you go on, because I know we're probably midway through this, I'm going to read the second part of the Amazon gift card claim code.
Right.
I don't want to just leave people hanging.
How many parts do we have?
There's just three parts. I don't know. Okay. So L43, A as in Apple, H as in Henry, 6. So L43AH6.
The other day we did a podcast about mobile technology in healthcare, and we didn't really get to this conversation so much, but this is some interesting continuity because, you're talking about all the data that your Fitbit is gathering and your Apple Watch is gathering about how many steps and so forth. Over time, as we begin to get more ownership of our own health data, or even just more access to it, we'll have this enormous pool of data to analyze.
Taking that into the workplace, right? Like, what are those applications? What data are you recording within your workplace that is the equivalent of the steps taken,
right,
or your weight or things like that? And then what are the applications you're crafting around that data?
That's exactly right. The health data becomes useful on the back end, not just personally, but for the populace at large in terms of achieving greater health. So similarly, I'm just wondering like how in the enterprise space this gamified data can translate to actual stats or results metrics to show that there's actually a greater benefit through the gamification.
Yeah, and I think it requires the business to take the data and the findings and the applications to that next level and help people understand how the improvement of these tasks at the core experience have an impact on the business overall. So, thinking about the warehouse example, if you're able to gamify tasks within the warehouse, right, and say, okay, if we can do this many shipments, whatever it is, if you build an experience around getting people to feel good about processing packages or moving pallets around, there's some tangible, measurable impact those tasks have on the business. And then if you're able to fulfill more orders because at your most fundamental level, you're performing better, then you're able to support doing more business. And therefore, when you do more business, you make more money. And so I think just showing how the numbers translate from the lowest level to the highest level can help the people at the lowest level who are doing the tasks understand their value. Even if it's just a minuscule amount, all those micro transactions add up to be one impactful macro transaction.
Now, I'm just thinking about the apps that we've developed at Propelics, and I'm realizing that all of them could benefit from gamification. We built some software for a company that does auto loan refinancing. Mm-hmm. And we redesigned all their software so it's all drag and drop. It's all like super intuitive, and somebody could come in basically on day one and start processing loans. But I'm realizing like, well, you could also gamify that to create even greater incentive, where every time they process a loan, they get points and they get to see it and they get to see what other people's points are and they get to see how fast other people are able to close a deal and so forth. Then we do a lot of work for Cintas. They do like the uniform delivery and rental and so forth. And that could easily be gamified. We built a route book app that just helps drivers complete their routes, know exactly what to expect on a route, how to get there, what the client needs, and so forth. And all of that could be gamified. Simply, that's almost a game already.
Yeah.
Like you've got a route, you have a task, you have information that you have to retain, and how quickly, how effectively can you get it done and get everything right?
Yeah.
And then you just like throw the points on there, It's almost like as soon as AR doesn't make you look like a cyborg.
Yeah, you're going to start seeing that data communicated right in your display. I had a friend who used to work for a beer distribution company in the Chicago area. And in an effort to move more Sam Adams product, Sam Adams struck deals with distribution companies like this one, where if their sales reps hit a certain threshold of sales of Sam Adams products, that employee would get flown out for like a huge party in Boston. It was a whole weekend affair, completely sponsored by Sam Adams. And it worked. I mean, my friend who lived in Chicago would come out to Boston every year because he was motivated to hit this benchmark of Sam Adams sales. So he was motivated by his company because if he hit this level, then he would get this free trip. So he's performing better. Sam Adams is performing better because they're offering a reward to these people, which to them, they're thinking about it from a long-term play. Yeah, the reward is at the beer distribution level and the motivating the employees who move that product. But really for Sam Adams, it's about getting more beer drinkers of their products, right? So the fact that all these guys are pushing more Sam Adams products trickles down to, well, more people are just drinking Sam Adams in general. But even the beer distribution company, like whoever's running that company, is motivated because now their guys are selling more product and making more money for them.
Sam Adams should really be paying
Sam
for
Adams
this.
Should sponsor
this podcast.
This podcast. It's a very real world example of just how sales can be gamified. Give your employees some sort of reward that gets them to perform better than they normally would be.
We built an app for a company that leases office equipment. Mm-hmm. DLL is the company. And we were so excited because we took all these business processes and we simplified them. Their salespeople were used to carrying around literally like binders of printed spreadsheets, and they would just have to go and figure out the pricing of everything, just, flipping through these spreadsheets. And we were able to take all that data and compress it down to 2 dials on a screen in an iPhone app.
Yeah.
But we didn't even consider adding the gamification layer on that and then motivating that process even more through comparison with other employees and badging and points and things like that, on top of the idea of just making your commission.
Well, I think probably for whoever was using the new application versus the prior experience, what you introduced was probably so revolutionary to them that you didn't necessarily need the elements of gamification. Exactly. But over time, that luster is going to wear off, right? And now using the app is just going to become just as commonplace or as boring as using the binders. And so then I think that's where having rewards and layering that into measuring someone's performance, that's where gamification, I think, can be pretty successful. But again, the variability of those rewards should be there too, because if you keep rewarding people with the same thing, over time, they're going to be bored by it. Just like, everyone has rewards programs for whatever, they do today. And so we become...
right.
Yeah.
Shopping is totally gamified.
Yeah, you earn points and everything now. So it's like, okay, well, I know I'm going to earn points no matter what, but can you redefine the game a bit to make it fresh and exciting so that people are, again, motivated? I think, honestly, it's just having variability, whatever the reward is. So I think the idea of sort of chance to win something or whatever the reward is, making it more like a spin the wheel type thing. So like whatever the reward is, let's just think of it in terms of spins of a wheel. And one of the prizes on a wheel could be like, $1 million, but most of them aren't. but and your expected payout on the reward's gonna, you can calculate that. But I think always having that chance is enough to keep people motivated, right? It's in the casino. It's like, oh, I could have a chance here to win the jackpot. I probably won't, but the fact that I have a chance and making the spin of the wheel so fun in itself, even if I lose or don't win what I desire, that's one way to approach making sure rewards don't get too tiresome. The components, it's like everything in a Mexican restaurant. It's like lettuce, tomato, whatever it is. But it's how you piece everything together that separate the top Mexican places versus the run-of-the-mill ones. And so I think it's how you apply these aspects to business effectively that would allow you to be successful in this space.
So lastly, I just wanted to discuss some of these statistics that I think are interesting when we talk about the future of gamification. So I found this BBVA Innovation Center report, and there's some statistics in here. I just would love to get your take on this. So they're saying that 18% of gamers are under the age of 18. 53% of gamers are between 18 and 49. And the average age of a gamer is 37. Aren't you like 37?
38.
And that 29% of gamers are over 50, which is almost me. So that's surprising to me.
The breakdown?
That breakdown, because the numbers of gamers under 18, that's the lowest number. Are people getting away from gaming? Does this suggest that it's becoming less popular?
Well, I'd be curious to look at those numbers just in terms of, just taking gaming out of it. What percentage of people are 18 and under versus 18 to 49 versus 50 and up. But in general, the idea of gaming is becoming more socially accepted. 20, 30 years ago, it was probably viewed more as a nerdy thing, but now I think it's just part of the social norm. The people who grew up in the era of arcades and Atari are now in that 18 to 49 bracket, right? And so they're totally fine with it. And I think, too, with the 50 and up, you're finding, or at least I see in the games I make, there's a lot of free time. And so the idea of playing casual games, whether it's, I know my mom plays all sorts of casino games and card games. Pogo.com is her go-to online, as well as GSN.com. obviously mobile devices too, being more prevalent in the types of experiences you can deliver on those devices allows you to reach gamers in all sorts of demographics. The stat I see looking at underneath that, which is 58% of gamers are men and 42% are women.
Yeah.
I would say that was probably like 80-20 years ago. And now you're seeing more gaming among women. And again, I think that's also attributed to it becoming more socially acceptable, to there being more games that cater to a more general audience, more casual games for sure. Depending on the type of gameplay, you'll see much more weighted stats. Like, I would imagine hardcore first-person shooters probably would gravitate more towards men. Puzzle and word games, I think, I would see a majority of women, probably more like 60% women, 40% men.
I don't want to generalize around that, but it's possible that you're right, that the more social games like Minecraft and so forth have a broader appeal.
Yeah, games like Minecraft for sure. I know my daughter's as into it as probably Gus is. I don't let her play it for different reasons. One thing that's challenging with games like Minecraft is that there's not necessarily any end.
There's no end.
Them, right?
Oh, I know.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, personally speaking, I can obviously see the appeal of that. For the last, like I said, 5 of the last 7 years, I've created casino games. There's no end to those until you run out of currency, but then you can always, spend more money. And same thing with Minecraft, right? Like you're limited by resources, but beyond that, you could keep playing forever.
Yeah, and it certainly brings in the freemium model too. Gus is constantly asking me to approve purchases for things I don't even understand.
Right.
I don't understand. You have Minecraft. No, this is like a winter layer or module. Or
So in terms of sales, there's consumables and non-consumables. So like add-on packs, like changing environments, like those would be non-consumables. Just like changing like the face on the back of a deck of cards in a solitaire game might be that. But consumables would be your virtual currency and things that can be exhausted or depleted over time. There's all sorts of different ways to monetize that I don't want to teach my kids or subject them to sort of those endless loop style games. Yeah, I try to, at least right now, steer them more towards anything sort of Mario related where there's the concept of levels and progression. And so it's like, okay, well, look at where you were a couple of weeks ago at World 1-1 versus now you're on World 7 or 8 and you've made all this progress and it's measurable, right? And you can point to that and you can see the progress in just their ability to play the game as well. With Minecraft, I think just because there's no end. And I guess there I would impose the limitations of time, right? And just say, okay, well, you get 30 minutes, but
less satisfying at the end of the 30 minutes.
Right, because at the end, where are you now versus where were you 30 minutes ago? And can you measure your progress? It's a little bit harder. Whereas I think with games with leaderboards or levels, it's easier to measure your progress.
So how do you think that informs an approach in the enterprise?
It goes back to my point earlier about being able to translate improvement within tasks or working together as a team to the impact that has on a business, right? So understanding that what you're doing, even in those 30 minutes or, even in this one task, additively, cumulatively has an impact on the business. So if you can gamify things in a way that allows people to see their progress versus having people just do this task and then, not have them feel like, oh, well, I had no impact. I just spent 30 minutes doing this and I don't know what impact that had. I think that's how I would apply those.
That's really awesome. I didn't even think about that. But in addition to personal goals, like, okay, you got 20 points, which is kind of an abstract thing, or you did it in this amount of time. What if you actually show the employee, like, the profit increase they had for the company? Oh, the company just made an extra $1.50 because you got that task done.
But I mean, when I worked at GSN, one of the things I really appreciated, just as being an employee there, was their transparency around the numbers. And everybody within the company was contributing to impacting the numbers in their own respective way. And so collectively, the team performed better when they saw like, oh, what we're doing actually matters. Like this number that you're showing to us on a daily basis keeps going up and up and up. And I'm contributing to that in my own way. Sometimes at companies, more often large ones than small ones, it's hard to translate what it is your employees are doing to that bottom line. And I think the more effective you are at communicating how what you're doing impacts the bottom line, you feel more responsible for what you're doing and you feel more invested in it too. Anything you can do that really just ties together all the different pieces within an operation. Think about the basketball example. Basketball, it's all about points at the end of the day, right? And LeBron James or Isaiah Thomas here in Boston, you get 30 points out of those guys pretty regularly. But think about the role players on those teams who are feeding them the passes, who make it possible for them to do what it is that they do. They're as important to the overall picture as the person who's scoring the points. So within an organization, there's probably going to be the people who have greater visibility to the organization as having impacted the numbers. But I think too, there's all the role players or the support staff that do impact the overall success of a company. And I think the more effective you are at, maybe you don't have to broadcast what it is that they're doing to everybody, but I think internally, as long as everyone understands, hey, I'm more successful when this person's more successful working next to me, and we feed off each other, you create that flow, right? Going back to jam bands, the Dave Matthews Band, he gets all the recognition, but if all the guys in that band, Carter Beaufort or whoever, aren't in the flow with him, the crowd's not as into it. So everyone has their role in an organization. I think the more effective management is at helping each member of the team understand their role and communicating what the numbers mean to the org that they provide, as well as, giving them reasons to perform better.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And I think that's really what it's all about. This transparency of data and the visualization of impact, I think, is another form of incentivization
totally
of tasks.
Yeah, I think specifically within a work environment, everyone has their own personal goals of what they'd like to achieve within a company. But I think the more that you can tie the personal goals to the company goals and then put in mechanisms that allow people to achieve the company-related goals so that people feel better about themselves and it all kind of feeds into each other. But the more effective it is, you're able to kind of tie those two narratives together. I think the more you're going to get out of employees, the more successful you'll be as a company. As you think about the company goals, usually those company goals can be broken out into, okay, well, who's consuming my experience? What service am I providing? What are the numbers that, if I were to represent my business model and break it down into user acquisition or engagement or loyalty and retention and monetization, looking at your business through all those different lenses, there's different ways to measure success and communicate success. But then there's also people within your org who are driving that success. And so you can gamify the experience for your end user. You can gamify the work experience for your employees. There's all sorts of different ways to view gamification.
Gamify it at all levels and all audiences in different ways.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Nick, thanks so much for stopping by.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll read out the last bit of the the Amazon.
All right, here we go, folks.
All right, the last.
I hope you didn't skip ahead.
I know. The last bit of the code is F as in Frank 75H. Piece those three things together in the Amazon gift card.
Is yours.
Code. Yeah, you get the $5.
But there's only one.
Only one.
All right, man. That was a great conversation. And thanks, everyone, for hopping on and listening to another episode of Device Squad, the podcast for the mobile enterprise from Propelics. All right, bye-bye, everybody. See you next time.